from a reading from my book, The 1969 Miracle Mets, which was published last year. It's the story of the Mets' drive for an inexorable victory in the 1969 World Series and the great Tom Seaver as he made his move on New York as one of the great celebrities and a true New York sports icon. In the eighth, Seaver induced Santo to fly to Agee. Then, facing Banks and Spangler, he seemed to jet it up a half a notch. The middle innings were over, his pitch count low, the game in hand. There was no holding anything back. Incredibly, he started throwing harder. The Mets fans watched, loud, crazy, boisterous, yes, but by now in awe. They were observing a baseball Michelangelo, a sculpture of the mound. Seaver, who admired his brother, the sculptor, and wanted to somehow duplicate in baseball what he could not do with clay, was now accomplishing this task. Old-timers, who had seen it all over the past 50 years of baseball in the golden age of New York, knew instinctively that the 24-year-old Californian was a new Koufax, a Ford, a Newcomb. Maybe better than any of those guys, a new breed. After Seaver rocketed a heater past Spangler to end the eighth, he walked off the mound to insane cheering. Announcer Bob Murphy then stated, "Ladies and gentlemen, after 8 innings, Tom Seaver is walking into the dugout with a perfect ball game." Grody grounded out, but White singled. Seaver donned the batting helmet, undid the donut from his bat, and gave his warm-up jacket to the bat boy. It was 9:55 p.m., Wednesday, July 9th, 1969, the seminal moment in which George Thomas Seaver entered the Pantheon. The crowd rose. They had been continuously cheering all through Seaver's dominant 8th inning, building to a crescendo that rocked the 5-year-old stadium to its very core. It was the sound Marilyn Monroe wished she heard when she gyrated before the boys in Korea. The sound Joe DiMaggio had heard when he, at his heroic best at Yankee Stadium, the knowledge of which he so contemptuously informed the breathless Marilyn when she tried to tell him, "Joe, you never heard such cheering." It was what Namath heard less than a year earlier, but according to all the pundits, all the experts and futurists, during this age in which Alvin Toffler's Future Shock was being taught in schools, it would never be heard again in a baseball game. That was yesterday, passé, old school. But here it was, Tom's official entrance and acceptance into the pantheon of the rarest of the rare, the true New York sports icon. Packers fans treated Bart Starr and Vince Lombardi like pagan idols. In Los Angeles, Sandy Koufax was given the star treatment. Many cities had their heroes, and of course they cheered wildly, they were loud, and it was electric. But this was New York. This was the biggest of the big time, the ultimate stage, the winning over with the most impressive of all bravura performances, the most cynical, loud-mouthed, hardcore, hard-to-please sports aficionados on the face of the earth. In this, we get to the heart of what made this different, what made this a miracle. The winning over of the crowd, the total childlike exuberance of the hardcore seen-it-alls had a Pentecostal touch to it. They were children, all of them, the middle-aged men who toiled for big bucks on Wall Street or union wages in a livery truck, the grandmothers wondering what was happening to kids these days, all the drugs and sex and lack of respect. Yet it all came together here with Seaver, a Pied Piper who did not quite know what was happening himself. So magical and mystical was it. The young man who old folks related to, the sex symbol who was faithful to his wife, the sports hero who 7 years earlier was 6-5 pitching for the Fresno High varsity, was now a New York hometown hero. So the sound washed over Tom Seaver. The stadium clicked 9:55, then 9:56. Above the stadium, Christy Mathewson, John McGraw, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Branch Rickey, and Mel Art formed a ghostly Hall of Fame, granting approval imprimatur to the newest member. Ruth called Seaver Keed. Manny told McGraw, "He reminds me of me." Rickey saw the perfect harmony of black and white teammates. The stands, a diverse mix of New Yorkers, and nodded approval for that with which he had wrought. In the Mets dugout, Yogi Berra understood that a new guy was joining that exclusive fraternity the one that included Joe D. and Mick. In the Cubs dugout, DeRocher looked enviously at the 24-year-old, knowing this mere child was ascending into a place where the Say Hey Kid was, a place where the diamond gods resided in regal splendor, a club he was barred from emerging into, no matter how expensive his silk suit or how stylish the dame on his arms. It was like Frank and Dean entering the room, turning and saying, "Sorry, Leo, not tonight," just as a giant bouncer stood between him and the entrance to the hallowed palace they were in, and he was not. Somewhere in America, Joe Louis and Rocky Marciano knew that Tom Seaver felt that special sense of recognition they had worked so hard to attain during all those nights at the Garden. Somewhere in Manhattan, probably at the center of a social world that had stopped itself in its tracks to watch the Mets game on television, Frank Gifford was smiling at the TV image of another Trojan entering the pantheon he had forged the previous decade. Out in California, a Glendale banker named Casey Stengel was most likely asleep when it happened, but upon his awakening and perusal of the Los Angeles Times the next morning, the old professor surely knew that a Met was in the most exclusive of clubs. Somewhere else, in temporary retirement after Pete Rozelle told him it was bachelor's 3 or football, not both, was Joe Willie Namath. He had a blonde on one arm, a brunette on another, and a bottle of Johnny Walker Red in the middle. His sense of inclusion, his egalitarianism, honed in segregated Birmingham where he walked the streets of the colored section like Huey Long, made Joe Willie smile. Sure, New York's big enough for the both of us. Welcome to the club, Tom.